Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another fantastic show for you all today. Brianna sadly is out sick, but this morning I am joined instead by Kim Iversen, bright and early. Good to see you, Kim. Thank you for waking up at the first light of dawn for us today.
It's not light outside yet now where I'm at on the West Coast. But yeah, I'm here all morning, and we're going to be joined by some other great people. We've got Amisha Cross and Jeff Charles. They're in for our Rising panel. We're going to be discussing some of the prominent Democrats who are not named Joe Biden, who are rumored to have begun putting out their feelers for a 2024 White House run. Also, we're going to be joined by Libby Emmons from the Post Millennial, and we're going to be getting her reaction on the NCAA's nomination of Penn swimmer Leah Thomas as Woman of the Year.
But first, President Biden's fist-bump diplomacy in Saudi Arabia took another hit yesterday after oil surged to over $100 a barrel. One market analyst told The Guardian, quote, "Traders got one clear message from Biden's recent visit to Saudi Arabia. It is OPEC Plus that makes the oil supply decision, and the cartel isn't remotely interested in what Biden is trying to achieve."
And nonetheless, the White House continues to celebrate this month's dip in gas prices, with Communications Director Kate Bedingfield touting the 50-cent drop as one of the fastest declines in prices at the pump in over a decade. But when challenged on whether the 50-cent drop is enough for struggling Americans, here's what Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre had to say to Fox News' Peter Doocy.
But again, we have seen gas prices go down in the past 34 straight days.
Aren't they still $2 a gallon higher than when you guys took office, though?
First of all, we have to look at the impact of how we got there, right? You think about the war that Russia has taken on in Ukraine, an unmitigated war, and a war that is brutal and that has had an effect on the price gas is going up, almost $2. We have talked about that endlessly. And also, we are also in a once-in-a-generation pandemic. So there are outside factors that has led to gas prices going up, to food prices going up, to inflation going up. So that is really important. What we have seen in the last 34 days is that gas prices have gone down on average by 50 cents a gallon. That matters. That matters to teachers. That matters to firefighters. That matters to nurses. That matters to everyday people, and the president is going to continue to do the work.
I mean, yeah, she's right that there are forces, outside the Biden administration's control influencing gas prices, although I don't know that the Ukraine-Russia war counts as a factor outside Biden's control, right? Because it's part of our foreign policy, is part of the is an aspect of the conflict that is perhaps making it go on more than it should. If we're committed to arming Ukraine, to funding their defense, no strings attached, as long as it takes, Biden has said in the past. So I don't think they get to say, oh yeah, Russia war, so, gas prices, what can we do about it? That's a policy choice to some extent, ours. Certainly Russia's to a greater extent, but also ours.
And I'm not really clear how much effect the ban that we have on Russia's oil coming into the country really has on the price of oil. I think one thing, it's just easy to say to people, hey, it's Putin's fault, and that's the real issue. But actually, the real problem is that we have refineries in the United States that have shut down. They shut down during the pandemic, and a lot of them never came back online. So they either shut down because there weren't enough workers, there was no real demand, and so they just let these refineries go, and they thought, well, now's a good time, I guess, to let them go. Or they shut down even because some of them for natural disasters. But we have less refining. I mean, the crude oil coming into the country, or that's needs to be refined, and then it's got to be marketed and distributed, and then retailers set their own prices. So a lot of this, there's a lot of dynamics that go into the price of gas. One big one is just corporate greed. There's just no way around it. Corporations are finding that this is a good time to start, they see the supply and demand issue, and suddenly people came back from a pandemic. They needed gasoline to go places. They wanted to start traveling again, and they're like, oh, well, we don't have the refineries as much anymore, so now we don't have as much supply. So, we can start jacking up some of the prices. So the big question, and this is a question I have for you as a libertarian, Robby, is, so the issue is a lot of these refineries are owned by private companies, and they're no longer in operation. And we really need those refineries to come back in, to come back online. Who does it? So because the corporations have no interest in it, and they have no interest in it for a couple of reasons. One, Why, when they could just charge more and make the same amount of money, in fact, record profits? Two, why would they when so many are trying to move away from oil and gas and into different forms of energy? So I mean, in my view, it should be the government that does take over some of these industries and says, rather than allowing the corporations to price gouge Americans when the opportunity strikes, the government should be in charge of something such as vital to our national security as oil. They should be having some stake in that. We should nationalize it a bit. That's my argument.
I mean, my counter argument would be the government is just so bad at everything it does. Yes, sometimes corporations do things we don't like or cost too much or whatever, but it could cost 18 times more if the government was in charge of it. If the government was in charge of a desert, you'd be out of sand in a day. They mismanage everything horribly. Our infrastructure is crumbling. A lot of it is an issue of it's too expensive and too costly because of regulations to do anything. So I'd want to look at why those refineries closed. Is it too costly to bring them back online because there's environmental impact reports you have to do and labor costs where there's minimum labor requirements and regulatory requirements? It's easier and cheaper to do everything outside this country because our government has made it impossible to work here. So I would want to look at those things. There might be factors we could get rid of. We could just say, okay, well, we can waive away. You don't have to do 18 inspections to bring this plant online. 16 inspections will be fine. And then the company might go, oh, okay, then this actually would be profitable. We'll do that instead. That would be my answer. I bet there's a lot of red tape forced on them by the government because I don't really want to. When you start having the government take over industries, then you get in this even if it is desirable, you get into, well, then this member of Congress is very invested in this company and this one's paid by that. You get a lot more corruption, the kind of corruption we're very worked up about, understandably, when, the people trying to regulate, for instance, tech, right, have stock in Apple and Facebook and other things. And it just gets very messy and corrupt. I don't want to subsidize these companies either, but I think probably if we got rid of some of the punitive regulations on them, it would make a difference.
Well, no one regulated that they closed down the refineries and that they, we definitely are having a supply chain demand issue. Mm-hmm. So I understand the price of gasoline going up just because we haven't figured out the, how to get trucks back on the road and distributing and drivers. And, we're having a worker shortage and a supply chain shortage for whatever reason. But the rest of it, no one forced them to shut down the refineries. I mean, they did, but I take that back. They did shut down the refineries a lot, largely, and much of the supply chain was crumbled and dwindled away during the pandemic when we had all of those closures. I mean,
the government makes it impossible to drill in a lot of places where it'd be easier to drill.
The drilling's not the issue. It's the refining. So we can drill all day, but we have to be able to refine that oil.
What I'm saying is I'm sure there are things the government has done to make that difficult as well, given how they treated the industry in general.
I mean, of course, there's always regulations and whatnot, but still the closing down of these refineries and the supply chain demand issues that we're having from lack of workers, mm-hmm. and that a lot of that stuff is actually causing the price of, because you have to ask, why is it that the price of gas at the pump is going down over the last 34 straight days, yet the price of the oil barrel, crude oil, has gone up? Well, Americans have to start connecting the dot there. So it's not when the price of when the crude oil goes up, the gas prices go up. They're not directly tied together. The rest of it is the corporations setting the prices. They're the ones that are deciding on the refinery and the distribution and the marketing costs, and then the actual retailers have to set their prices based on what they're buying at wholesale. So it's complicated.
But why would our government take over the refineries and then get us more gas? Isn't our government's goal to move us away from gas? I wouldn't trust the government to do that anyway, right? They're gonna take over the refinery and shut it down all over again because they don't want you driving a car.
And that's a good point. The Biden administration has a real problem there, right? Because on one end, and even with the refineries closing down, on one end, now in the situation that we're in, many of us would say, why didn't you keep those refineries going? Did you need to help them out? Because it was the government's fault for closing down the economies. People were staying home. So those were government regulations largely. So then you would say you would need to at least subsidize our basic necessities. And that includes oil, whether people like it or not. But on the flip side, but then you know what would have happened? I mean, people would have screamed about that. That you would have had AOC, the first one out there, saying, "Oh, now he's, rather than giving money to the people, he's giving money to the oil refineries, to oil companies to keep them going." And then now, when it's time to potentially, we need to ramp back up and get our supply back, especially if the Saudis are going to say, hey, you know what, we're not helping you out, you're on your own. Well, then it is important for us to have our own refineries so that we can be energy independent. But, what kind of optics for a Biden administration would that be, that the government's going to start pumping out more oil, refining more oil?
The air travel issue is such a good example of how this can go wrong, right? Because the government gave the airline industry a big bailout during the pandemic because they said, okay, look, we don't want all these employees to get fired, but air travel is going to be offline for a good long while because we're really shutting things down and the pandemic's going to go on forever. That was like the message from the government. What happened is the airlines got rid of too many pilots anyway, despite taking all this money, and then the desire among passengers to travel came back much faster than the airlines planned for, and a lot faster than the government thought it was going to even be capable of allowing people to do so. So now the industry is like more screwed up than it has ever been in our lifetime since 9/11, despite the government's very concerted effort to keep these employees. Like it just totally failed. And I worry something similar would happen. It's just such a great example. Like our government is so incompetent. I don't know that that's just a Biden administration thing. I think it's probably not just a Biden administration thing. Certainly, the Biden administration doesn't seem more competent than the average. So,
well, let's look at what Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has to say about this. He very well might be the next president, so you might be railing on him and after 2024 and his incompetence. But he jumped into the oil and gas fray after Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia, criticizing the president for ignoring domestic solutions to the energy crisis. Let's take a look at that.
How come it's wrong to produce our own oil and gas here, but you can go to Saudi Arabia and FistBump to try to get it from Saudi? I mean, it makes no sense that we wouldn't do it. We have opportunities here to be energy independent and not have to worry about any of these other countries, and yet they're intentionally not doing it. And you can't run a modern economy on windmills. You just can't do it. So we do a lot of solar in Florida. It is a complement. It does not displace the traditional forms of energy. And so now we're in a situation, they're bragging that gas has gone down over the last however many weeks. It's still over $4. Like, I had never seen it over $4 in my whole life living here. So, I mean, it's really, but that is the problem. It's just when you're cranking the printing presses, you're making energy more expensive, that creates an upward pressure on all of this stuff.
Well, listen, Republican, I mean, what do you want to do? You want the government to take over the process? I mean, look, we could complain all day. Ron DeSantis and other Republicans can complain all day about the Biden administration not doing enough. But that sounds a lot to me like they're advocating for government to intervene, maybe even take over and put some of these refineries back online with government workers. I'm not opposed to that at all. I just think that, look, both sides of this situation are to blame. The Biden administration needs to take some blame for shutting down the economy that caused a lot of these corporations to then say, we don't have a business then, we're shutting down. And then Republicans on the flip side need to understand that, look, if you want the government to intervene, then you're going to have to get on board with a little bit of this, government intervention and nationalization of the oil industry.
Yeah, I don't think the government can be trusted to nationalize these industries and then make them better. They're going to shut them down. Like our government wants us to not work. They want you to stay in your home until the COVID pandemic is over. I can't imagine feeling confident and safe enough to give them more control over our economy. But yes, the current situation is very frustrating, and I think we'll be hearing from Ron DeSantis on a lot of these issues in the next few months and years. Obviously, I do expect he's going to be the Republican nominee, but we'll find out what Donald Trump
never
has
know,
to say about
right?
that.
You never know what's going to happen. But we'll be talking about some of that later on in the show. But next, we've got your radar, Robbie. Looking forward to that.